How good is your healer spec? Who should you invite to your party and groups? I'm kidding. Get everybody in because they're actually not doing so bad. And we are going to be looking at how the healers are performing in Mythic Plus. What are the pains and struggles and what do they excel at? Allegedly, at least the very top end, because it's always fun to see which spec pushes the highest. And we're going to start ranking them right now with a little short disclaimer. We look at the absolute highest of keys to judge these healers and kind of analyze what they're doing, of course, with a subjective bias. We're only human, but we're basically using data for this. If we wouldn't be breaking them apart by, let's say, key level and who gets to push the higher key level first, then we would have almost all of them in the same tiers because they're very good and they're very close. I mean, the worst healer in today's list will be pushing plus 19 keys. Now that is very high. So let's start it off with Resto Druid. Right now, Resto Druid will be what I would like to call S tier. And right now, Resto Druids are pushing plus 21s. Now, Resto Druid has been neck and neck with the best healer out there, but is not in the best tier yet because it's actually one key below that, and we'll get to that eventually. Resto Druid does a couple of really good things. It essentially excels at raw damage healing. It's one of the best healers for probably one of the worst dungeons out there to heal. I believe Floodgate, at least in my opinion, since Swamp Face seems to have some of the highest heal checks, or at least prolonged heal checks, because there's just like not a dull moment there ever. Additionally, Resto Druid has a couple of really good tools. Its Dispel removes curses and poisons, the absolute worst offenders this season, as opposed to people like Resto Shaman who need to actually talent into a very specific poison dispels. Because of that warrants it very high. Its damage is not particularly amazing. It's kind of like middle of the pack, depending on how you're considering it. You do have to go into cat to do that damage, and design-wise, that's probably pretty good. But what probably you will really enjoy by playing Resto Druid and you might appreciate is the Iron Bark, personal for your tank, for your DPSers that are soaking a particularly dangerous mechanic, and access to really bursty healing very often. Convoke is on a very short cooldown. You can use it offensively or defensively. Then you have pretty often access to Soul of the Forest big regrowths with Swiftmans as well, and you can just spread rejuvenations out with the Abundance playstyle that's being played today to give you really quick casts on regrowth. If for some reason you're just, oh my god, for the next 5 seconds I need to spam everybody, then prepping some rejuvenation ahead of time for some of those big abundant stacks will make your regrowth casting super quick, super efficient. Moving on to Preservation, it will be a little bit lower. We're going to put Preservation into A tier. Probably a little bit better than it has been doing in the past, but once again, like I mentioned, healers are fairly close. Preservation right now is pushing, I believe, 20s, a little bit below Resto Druid, which is why they cannot be necessarily in the same tier, because let's put a little bit of difference. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between the two. First of all, I do believe that I think Preservation is the squishiest healer, at least statistically, if you take a look at the damage intake. Now, of course, that is very relative because it depends on how these people are using their defensives. Maybe they opt to actually not use their defensives for something that would look bad on logs, but use it for specific situations where they might die. But it's no surprise that Evokers are squishy. Male classes in general are as such, but it's not as squishy as the other male healer that's coming on this list. What Preservation does really well, and the best out of all of the healers, is its damage output from the Chronomancer Chrono Flames. Bro, they're absolutely cranking, and it's not even close. They have the absolute highest DPS out there, and even by that standard is still relatively low and uninspiring. To be fair, listen, if all healers would have this level of damage, we could talk about healers being able to feel at least like they're contributing to the overall DPS. They don't have game-breaking DPS like they used to have back in Shadowlands and BFA, but at least Preservation has some relevancy whenever it might matter. Moving to Mistweaver, one of the most efficient healers out there. We're still going to be putting it into A tier. It's still pushing 20s. Now, I don't know which one of the two is a little bit better. It's a little bit difficult because Mistweaver, as opposed to Preservation, is the worst spec of the current class. Possibly. Brewmaster is absolutely insane. So if you want Monk Toolkit, you're not going to take it from Mistweaver. So if we're going to be talking about the benefits of having a Mistweaver in your group, they might not come as much from the Monk Toolkit. Of course, you're never going to have Mistweaver and another Monk spec in your keys if you're pushing the absolute highest, because there's massive diminishing returns on what you can do. However, the spell that it has definitely removes poisons. Once again, similar to Druid, it doesn't have the curse effect on it, which is a little bit but what it does have that the other two healers don't have is very efficient healing with fist weaving essentially and ancient teachings, because you just do your melee rotation, you do okay-ish damage. It's not going to turn any heads, so you're not going to want Mistweaver for the damage that it does, but it is more or less free damage because it does get converted into your healing, and you have access to very quick healing cooldowns like the Chi-Ji, Shaman, Jade Empowerment, especially if you play Master of Harmony, because, oh, by the way, you can actually play both hero talents as opposed to Druid, and I'm not sure if Preservation plays anything other than Chronomancer, but you probably don't want to do that anyway because of the damage. But Mistweaver does actually have some options where you can play either Conduit. I think the rank 1 Mistweaver that we looked at prior to recording this, at least in Halls of Atonement, was playing Conduit, but the majority were playing Harmony. So there's a very good dynamic there that you can engage in. Kind of similar to Druid, you have access to a lot of heal throughput through very short cooldowns. Nothing big like Tranquility, but at least you have 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 minute healing profiles that you can actually engage with. Unfortunately, Life Cocoon is still Life Cocoon. It might not do almost anything on a tank, but tanks don't usually have a lot of problems this season, so maybe yay for you to see more play. Now we're going to be moving on to Holy Paladin, the diametrically opposed to Preservation tankiest healer in this game, which would make sense because it's wearing plate and it has an immune and it has incredible defensives, probably the best single target defensives or spot defenses or whatever they might be called for your group, period. Paladins are actually really good in Mythic Plus, but unfortunately for Holy, you might be outshined by Prop Paladin since it has better versions of your defensives. Even so, Freedom, by the way, did you know that it makes you and your target immune to Suleiman's Thunderclap? This is something that no other class has and only Paladin brings, and removes 2 people from being healed from that particular mechanic, which is, you know, the first pull in Priory that can be really dicey, that can make or break the first key. It's not the most difficult one, but it is very high up there. It's a 9 out of 10 difficulty in Priory. If, let's say, after the first boss, you would probably count them as 10 out of 10. So it's still really good. Obviously, Devotion Aura and Aura Mastery are very good damage prevention. You're going to have permanent 3% damage reduction for all of your party, which adds up by the end to, let's say, save you maybe some drinking, if that's even a thing anymore for Holy Paladins. Discipline Priest. Now, a lot of people debate that Discipline Priest is very good, and it is very, very, very close to Resto Druid, but it's just not pushing at the same level. It's still pushing 20s, but if there's one here that will break out of the 20s first, will probably be Discipline. I'm not sure if this will change as the patch goes on, but we are seeing quite a little bit of variety from Discipline Priest. First of all, you can still play both of the hero talents. You might want to play Void Weaver for the actual damage output, which rivals that of Resto Shaman, that we all know is pretty damn good, or swap to Oracle for bigger heal absorbs and very efficient healing with the bubbles and shields that you get from Oracle, which are still a thing. I don't think they're as strong as they were last season, but they're definitely strong enough to get Discipline Priest up in the highest of keys. Other than that, you have the probably absolute best single target defensive for your tank in Pain Suppression. You have 2 charges of it. I don't think it competes with the Holy Paladin one. Holy Paladin has the Blessing of Protection that makes you immune, but you cannot really put that on tanks. But with Discipline Priest, you can definitely put that on tanks, and it's absolutely incredible for those high pulls. Now, you might not need to put them on tanks, depending on your group composition. You might have to put them on your party members, on your squishies, on your shamans, on your hunters, depending on the group composition once again. But you do have those options, and the barrier is probably one of the biggest AoE defensive ability that a healer can bring, outside maybe Spirit Link, but you know, it's debatable. Preventative damage is always best, or preventative healing rather, which is not something that we can say about Holy Priest, and probably one of the biggest detractor into getting this spec to push very, very high keys. The nature of the healing these days is just a lot of burst healing that you have to be able to resolve. Now, a lot of the previous healers that we talked about have some ways to prepare in ahead of time for that, so that once the damage happens, you can resolve it really quick, which is the better way of problem solving healing issues. Now, if you only have healing after the fact, then you have to, I'm not saying gamble, but you have to kind of pray a little bit that if somebody takes those big swamp face Awaken the Swamps hits, then people don't actually also get hit by a bubble because you won't have time to get them up. Of course, that is just a very generalized way to look at Holy Priest. It has obviously a very good kit, but it is pushing the lowest of keys out of everybody. It is pushing, I believe, right now 19s. Now, 19s, and we put it into B tier. That doesn't mean it's a bad spec, because 19s are still very, very, very high keys, so it's still a very good healer. You still play Oracle, which has a lot of heal absorb, which is maybe the saving grace of Holy Priest that can keep it all the way up in these keys. And of course, Mass Dispel. I didn't mention this for Discipline, but Mass Dispel is obviously very, very good. But we want to differentiate the level and the performance of these healers, so kind of breaking them apart based off of key level is one way of doing it, because it's just a little bit more interesting as opposed to having just everybody into S tier and maybe Restoration Shaman into S+. Now, I do want to preface this that it's just slightly ahead of Resto Druid, but it's ahead enough where there's a difference there, so that makes it a little bit interesting to put it a tier above. It is actually the only healer pushing 22s right now, but they're not timed. I don't think we have any 22s timed at the moment, and a lot of them are definitely, or actually all of them are not logged whatsoever, so we don't even know what people are doing there. We're probably going to find out in a week or two time, but it's not a surprise to say that this is the best healer this patch. Of course, you have Poison Cleansing Totem to deal with Arakara, and some of the top Resto Druids, Resto Shamans rather, play with the Totemic Recall and the cooldown reduction of it, so you can shoot these back to back for at least the beginning part of the dungeon. You can also use them at the last boss, but that requires a lot of coordination because the poison dispels are a little bit random, and if your party isn't already pre-positioned to make sure that the poison waves don't hit your friends, then that's going to be tricky. So it's very hard to pull off in a pug keys, by the way, so I'm just letting you know now. However, the Farseer playstyle makes it very efficient in healing. If you don't need insane emergency heals, you can just throw out your Riptides left and right, the occasional chain heal, and then just do damage, which is really good. If you have the 3 ancestors out and you spam those chain heals, or chain lightnings rather, you can actually do quite significant damage overall. Another good thing that Restoration Shaman brings is the Earth Grab Totem, something that maybe only Resto Druid can do with Mass Entanglement, but I don't think you're ever going to be playing that on any Druid spec anytime soon, and you don't really sacrifice much for it if you're a Resto Shaman, and you can use this in dungeons like Gambit where you can stop those Morlocks going around, but probably more importantly is in Arakara for the first boss. Once again, that's probably the hardest boss of the dungeon because it has these very tight mechanics that you really want to get down. Maybe it's harder for the lower end players, us that we do our +10s and +12s. But if you can use this Earth Grasp program to keep the ads in place or prevent Morlocks from running around, you're going to make your party very happy. On top of, all the shaman-y things, Resto Shaman rather, where you bring the mastery buff for your party. Spirit Link is actually very, very good. Now with the talent that you play for Healing Tide, which I forget, where you get those instant healing surges out that are very good, and if you can match them up with Master of the Elements, you can just spread a lot of flame shocks out on people, giving you more lava burst, more Master of the Elements, more immediate burst heal on a target. It might not be the best spot healing in the game, but it's definitely enough to keep people up in between your cloud burst totem breakouts, all in all. Now, the healing meta is actually really good. Maybe not as good as the tanks, but we do see more and more people bring all of these healing specs up to the highest end of keys, and it is actually really fun to play this season, but healing issues might still exist. But if you do want to make sure that you get into your group and healing is not your jam, you can definitely check our tank tier list that we posted out last week to kind of see how the tanks fare, because you will want some group composition with your healers, and knowing what tanks are good might actually help you make that happen. So